I'm going to end my team viewer session. All right, guys, 1 minute. Have an excellent show. It's a pleasure. I can't wait to hear the show.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. What's this one?
Hello, and welcome to Spilt Milk, the Food Trust Podcast. I'm your host, Raina Andrews. Spilt Milk is a weekly podcast powered by the Healthy Food Movement. This podcast is focused on our global food system. Here we talk about food politics, food justice, and food as medicine. As a mother, a health enthusiast, an author, and a food literacy coach, I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of our food system. And I want to bring the knowledge I've learned to you so that you and your family can make informed decisions about your health and well-being. This is a live podcast, so you can tune in every Friday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time on our Spilt Milk Facebook page. So be sure to like and share. So let's get to it. On today's show, we're talking about diet and cancer 101. Cancer is one of the leading causes of death worldwide, but studies suggest that simple lifestyle changes such as following a healthy diet could prevent 30 to 50% of all cancers. Growing evidence points to certain dietary habits increasing or decreasing cancer risk. What is more nutrition is that to play an important role is treating and coping with cancer. With March being National Nutrition Month, focuses really attention on the importance of making informed food choices and developing sound eating and physical activity habits. We thought it'd be helpful to really focus in on good food coupled with prevention to heal our bodies. And to help us explore the intersection of prevention through nutrition, we invited Dr. Kenneth Jacobsohn, board-certified urologist, oncologist, and associate professor at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Ken, how are you doing?
Doing great. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you so much for being here with us. So just to kick us off, we've heard, we hear the term urologist and oncologist, but plenty of times people don't really know what a urologist does or an oncologist. So can you just kick us off by telling us what is it that you actually do?
Most people don't know what a urologist is until they meet one. That's right. We're kind of a smaller field in medicine, but urologists treat diseases of the urinary tract for men and women. So that's kidneys all the way down to the bladder, and then male reproductive organs. So prostate, testicle, penis, and that can be benign disease, things like kidney stones, enlarged prostates, urinary incontinence, or cancers of any of those organs.
Oh my goodness. So
now, oncologists, sorry, I didn't cut you off. So oncologists generally are a term which refers to people who treat cancers, but urologic oncologists, like myself, treat specifically urologic cancers primarily with surgical interventions. So things like chemotherapy or radiation are more the domain of radiation oncologists or medical oncologists. We do surgeries, things to remove things like kidney tumors or bladder cancers or prostate cancers. So it's actually a pretty busy field. Um, but again, most people don't know about us till they need us.
So when you talk about a lot of the cancers in the urinary tract,
Hmm.
in the lower parts of our body, how does someone get cancer, like penis cancer or something like that? Or
So penile cancer is actually a pretty rare cancer.
yeah.
I shouldn't say rare, but pretty uncommon. So specifically about penile cancer, typically is a cancer of the skin of the penis, predominantly in uncircumcised men. So I know you were going places you didn't think you were going to go.
No.
Circumcised men do not get cancer of the penis. You
Mm-hmm.
can't other things. But urinary tract cancers typically refer to cancers of the lining of the urinary tract, like the inside of the bladder, which is the same as the lining of the kidneys. And those cancers are predominantly caused by smoking. So that's our biggest
Oh
risk
wow.
factor. And I see patients have that reaction all the time. They're like, "Well, I knew I could get lung cancer, but I had no idea that I could get or throat cancer. But I had no idea I could get bladder cancer." You can,
Wow.
but also a less common cancer than some others. The most common cancer that I see is actually prostate cancer. The incidence is considerably higher than the other male reproductive organ cancers. And we can actually screen for prostate cancer and should be screening for prostate cancer, whereas the other cancers typically don't undergo any sort of screening.
So with prostate cancer, is there a demographic that experiences prostate cancer at a higher rate?
Well, for sure. So, kind of the obvious thing is, right, like men, right? Women
Right.
don't have a prostate. But age is a big risk factor. Family history is a big risk factor. So the older we are, the more likely we are to get it. And then certain men have genetic predisposition, particularly men with West African heritage,
Wow.
African American men, black men at higher risk. And then, of course, men who live in a Western lifestyle. So, and that's kind of like everybody around here,
Yeah.
compared to some historical populations not consuming our diet, not living our lifestyle. Basically, extremely small rates of prostate cancer until their descendants move here or move to a Western lifestyle, and then their rates go up pretty high.
So why would you say that particularly black men or men from West Africa are more disposed, are more likely to get prostate cancer? What is it about that population?
Well, I think so. These are things we don't necessarily know all the answers to. There's certainly, our genes are our predisposition.
Mm-hmm.
Our genes are not necessarily our fate. Most of our genetic diseases, genetic malignancies represent probably only 2 to 3% of premature death. But our genes are our predisposition. So there's something in that lineage which makes interaction with our lifestyle to increase the risk. And But interestingly, some of the lowest ever recorded prostate cancer populations are African indigenous tribes prior to being exposed to the things that we have around us.
Mm-hmm. So before that, you also mentioned lifestyle has a lot to do with it, and especially the way of the West, our Western lifestyle. What is it about the way that we live that would predispose or make someone more susceptible to the variety of cancers that you treat?
Well, it isn't necessarily the ones that I treat any more than any other cancers, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that we know contribute to chronic inflammation, that contribute to chronic disease? So, like the root cause of chronic disease, which may manifest as prostate cancer or heart disease, is kind of all the same. And so that's poor nutrition, lack of exercise, so sedentary lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
um, stress, not managing stress, not getting restorative sleep, lacking social connectedness,
That seems like everything since the pandemic.
Right, right, yeah, and then risky behaviors, right? Things like tobacco use, excessive alcohol.
Yeah. So, have you seen a trend? Are the numbers going up or the numbers going down? I feel like we probably know more about cancer disparities and prevention now than ever. Are the numbers increasing or decreasing?
Well, depends upon the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So, some are going up, some are sort of steady. Kidney cancer's been on the rise the last few years as we have more obesity.
Mm-hmm.
Prostate cancer's been sort of waxing and waning, but that has more to do with how we're detecting it, I think, than the overall incidence. Um, they're very dependent upon the specific disease, but the incidence overall, I think, is fairly stable to slightly rising. Some of our mortality rates have improved as our treatments have improved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can imagine that it's probably pretty difficult to really prove that certain foods cause cancer. However, I know that some observational studies have repeatedly indicated that high consumption of certain foods may increase the likelihood of developing cancer, like sugar and refined carbs and processed meat, overcooked food, some dairy. What do you say about this?
Well, it's absolutely true, right? The tricky part about nutritional science is it is very complicated. There are a lot of confounders, things that can make the data challenging to interpret. Sort of like what's always been held up as the gold standard of science is double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled trials where we can really separate two groups and test one factor. And that's just not possible in nutritional science because there are so many other factors in play. So, for example, if we eat one thing, it generally means we don't eat something else. So, like, if I randomize one group to eat a bunch of quinoa, it probably means they're not eating something else in their diet. Or similarly, people who generally make whole food, healthier choices tend to exercise more regularly. They tend not to smoke. And so it's very difficult to pin these things down. So we have to look at lots of different types of data. We have to look at epidemiologic studies, population studies. We have to look at basic science studies and try to put the whole thing together and say, what does the overall evidence point us towards? So you're absolutely right. There have to be certain foods which predispose, and there have to be really eating patterns which predispose. Because it's going to be very hard to pin down, like, well, it's this one item. Certainly, we know, as you alluded to, processed meats are carcinogens. They're known to cause colon cancers. The World Health Organization has labeled these as type 1 carcinogens along the lines of cigarette smoking. It's really just amazing that we continue to eat these things. And that's everything from deli meats to sausages. They're all just terrible.
All these foods with different nitrates. What about this, people are like, well, I'm a vegan, and they eat still processed foods or things that come in bags or these scientifically manufactured foods like the impossible foods.
Right.
Would those be considered processed meats as well?
So,
not technically meat then.
Right. So I don't think, so the specific question on impossible foods is no, I don't think that counts as a carcinogen the same way as sausage from an animal does. But a lot of these processed foods are not health foods, right? So, and I think we're going to go there later, but, being a vegan in my opinion, is an ethical philosophy to do as little harm as possible. It is not necessarily a healthy movement for yourself. So Oreo cookies and Coca-Cola are vegan, but consuming those does not lead to health. And so there's been a lot of people in the celebrities, YouTube people, I'm leaving veganism because I didn't end up healthier. Well, you were eating junk, so of course you didn't end up healthier. Now, you did mention dairy, and dairy, back to sort of my own home base here, is dairy is clearly implicated in prostate cancer. And that association has been seen in many, many different studies. And I overwhelmingly recommend my patients who are concerned about prostate cancer to avoid dairy for that specific reason. Lots of other reasons to avoid dairy, of course.
So I agree with you 100%. And I stopped eating dairy for sure 3 years ago when I realized that dairy, I'm highly allergic to it. And how it showed up is that I would have these breakouts all over my face and eczema all over my body and asthma. And again, I was really overweight then. And I just did not know what was happening. And through process of elimination for myself, I realized that it was dairy. So everyone that I talk to, I say, don't consume dairy. But I had no idea about the dairy is clearly implicated in prostate cancer. Why is that? What is it in the milk or the cheese or the yogurt that has a connection to prostate cancer?
Well, as I understand, I mean, dairy is a hormonal product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dairy is growth formula.
Mm-hmm.
As has been stated by others, nature's intent of dairy is to grow a baby calf into a full-size cow as quickly as possible. So it's full of growth hormones, things like insulin, like growth factor 1, IGF-1. So when we feed growth formula to adults of another species, it should be no surprise that things grow that we don't want to grow. And in particular, that's going to be other hormonal organs like prostate cancer, like breast cancer, like ovarian cancer. And so we see higher incidence of those diseases in dairy consuming populations. And the general public opinion that dairy is a health product is marketing. There's no science to state that. And that's not to say that dairy is devoid of nutritional value, but we can get all that nutritional value somewhere else without the hormones and, of course, without all the implications to animals and the planet as well.
Mm-hmm. And so we talked about dairy, processed food. Now, can you speak to what role that sugar and maybe refined carbs may have?
Yeah. So this is a little bit more complicated. So refined carbs, just to define for the audience, are processed carbohydrates. Think table sugar, right? I love unprocessed, unrefined carbohydrates in their abundance because they come with fiber. They come with all the vitamins and minerals and nutrients attached.
And these are the ones that come in fruit, right?
The ones that come in fruit, that come in potatoes, that come in beans and grains. We should be eating those in abundance. There's overwhelming scientific evidence to show that with increasing, fruit and vegetable consumption comes decreasing all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. But processed sugar is easily overconsumed, right? So then we add it to donuts and juices, etc. And we absorb those calories very, very quickly. So like 100 calories of fruit juice, not the fruit, we probably absorb 199 or 100 calories. You eat a 100-calorie banana, you do not absorb 100 calories. Mm-hmm. So eating this way is a pro-inflammatory way to eat and leads to a lot of excess calories. And we know that excess calories equals obesity. The consequences of obesity and metabolic syndrome are profound. There is some carcinogenic things in there, but also things like diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, etc. goes on and on. And so I know there are a lot of people that sort of subscribe to this, like, don't feed your cancer sugar mentality. Mm-hmm. I look at it a little bit differently. I think that yes, that's, maybe there's some truth to that. I'm not really sure what the evidence is, but I should be eating fruit in abundance. Mm-hmm. And if I eat, an amazing orange or an apple, my brain should tell me right away there should be no reason I shouldn't be consuming this type of sugar in all the quantity I want to consume.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, with you eating apples and oranges and bananas, do you have a preference whether it's organic? Or
Good question. Mm-hmm. So This is sort of a controversial point. I think that from a health standpoint, conventional produce, non-organic produce, has all the nutritional value that organic produce has. And organic produce can be a bit cost prohibitive. I think that the primary advantage to organic is billed as better for the planet. I think the difference in terms of our health is probably quite small. But not all organic farming is equal, and not all organically produced produce is equal. If there's like no barrier, we should know where our food comes from. We should know what the farmers are doing, but that's typically not possible. And so, I'm not. We don't necessarily go out and seek organic produce. There was this nutritionfacts.org, other places keep a dirty dozen list. You can find that on the web. That's kind of the produce which has the highest rate of pesticide contamination. I try to go by that if I can, right? So the top of that list is usually things like strawberries, things without a real thick skin on them. So, when cost is not a barrier, we'll stick with organic strawberries or peaches. But other than that, conventional produce is just fine.
I'm glad that you said that regarding cost is not a barrier, because I'm wondering if socioeconomic living conditions or folks, does economics in people's lifestyle make a difference, or do you see a connection with who is showing up with prostate cancer or some of these other cancers that you mentioned?
Well, yeah, absolutely, and very complex things in play, right? So,
because I'm also thinking about environmental trauma, like post-traumatic stress, and trying to make ends meet, and that in itself for lifestyle is increasing stress in people's life.
Well, I think that plays a role. I mean, there's so many layers, right? What is the trust in the medical system that might allow people to present? So a lot of times we'll see black men presented higher stage, or women presented higher stage cancers, and that's not necessarily felt to be a genetic predisposition. It has to do with when they come into the medical system. Certainly people eating poor quality diets. Like I said, it's not just one, right? So if you eat a poor quality diet, you're probably less likely to get regular exercise, or more likely to smoke, have more stress in your life. All these things contribute.
So you kind of hinted to obesity having a high probability rate of getting cancer, or being one of those factors. Do you see this as a common problem with the patients that you see in urology and your urology and oncology departments?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the number right now is somewhere between 70 and 80% of Americans are overweight or obese. I mean, the numbers are astronomical. So, we see that absolutely. I mean, it's every day, all day.
So there's probably like a direct connection. Like if you're overweight, you just significantly increased your chances.
Well, you're certainly right. If you're overweight or obese, your chances of having a chronic disease are exceedingly high. And whether that is heart disease or diabetes or prostate cancer, again, the root cause is the same. And we can see, slowing down a reversal of all of those diseases, including early stage prostate cancer, by fixing lifestyle. And similarly, leaner patients, vegans, have lower incidence of prostate cancer, lower incidence of aggressive prostate cancers. So yeah, these are the patients that we see all day, every day.
So I mean, you're definitely speaking from a position of knowing, not only as a practitioner, but also someone who practices this lifestyle, more of a plant-based nutrition lifestyle yourself. Do you live a plant-based lifestyle?
Yeah, 100%. I should say, so 100% vegan diet. Do I have like occasional snacks or Impossible Burgers? Sure, right? Nobody's perfect that way. And I wouldn't say course, it's probably impossible to be a perfect vegan as well, but I have not willingly consumed any animal products in 3 years.
That's fantastic. And does your family follow suit? Have you been able to recruit your kids?
Well, the kids are along for the ride. There was a little kicking and screaming initially, but that didn't last very long. But no, my our whole family's on board, and it's been an interesting journey. We've brought many friends and relatives and trainees along to some degree along the way. So and that's been very rewarding.
So what got you on this train? What inspired you to say, you know what, 3 years ago I need to change my lifestyle. I need to change my diet.
So it's an interesting evolution because I trained in a Western medical system where I got none of that information, and my dad, who's a retired physician, was diabetic for 6 years. Seeing good providers, paying attention, taking his metformin reliably, checking his blood sugar 6 times a day, but he just wasn't doing all that great. He didn't like the medication, like how I made it feel. Mm-hmm. And one day his physical therapist for his shoulder injury said, well, why don't you look into this book called The End of Diabetes by a guy named Joel Fuhrman? So if you change your diet, you can get off your medication. So he bought the book and he called me up and he said, I'm going to do this. And he'll tell you, I basically laughed at him like, you're crazy. Well, in a matter of weeks, he'd lost a bunch of weight. In fact, in 6 weeks, he was down about 35 pounds. And
Wow. Was your dad a pretty big guy?
You would never have looked at my dad and said he's a big guy.
Wow. And he lost 35 pounds in a matter of weeks, 6 weeks, just by changing his diet.
Not exercising.
Wow.
So I said the same thing. I was like, okay, we need to pay attention. So my wife and I started looking around, and we watched, initially we like documentaries. So we watched the documentary on Amazon Prime called That Sugar Film. And That Sugar Film is really about processed foods. There's a lot of animal products consumed in that movie. So we quickly eliminated some of the processed sugars that were in our diet. I started looking at nutrition labels, which I'd never looked at a nutrition label ever in my entire life. Thought I was eating, thought my Greek yogurt and granola was a good choice for breakfast.
No,
it was not. And
when I started reading labels and I read orange juice and I see the concentrate, the amount of sugar in a glass of orange juice is the equivalent to a can of Coke in some products.
It's crazy, yeah.
Go ahead.
So that was so then we did that for a little while, a couple months, and then we watched we quickly watched Forks Over Knives and What the Health.
Yeah.
And boy, that was, especially What the Health was kind of a profound night at our house, and it was like, what are we feeding our kids? What are we doing to ourselves? And so my wife and I decided we wanted to try it 1 week. Can I just eat this way 1 week? We didn't know what the heck we were going to eat. We didn't have a plan. This was like,
Did you think, I'm just going to be stuck eating salads?
We were going to plan a lot of hummus wraps. Uh-huh. I'm pretty sure we ate hummus wraps for dinner like 5 nights in a row. Mm-hmm. But within 2 days, my daughter was no longer having cramping abdominal pains. Mm. My wife's GI tract felt better. I was no longer coming home exhausted from work. I didn't even feel like I needed my cup of coffee in the morning. Yeah. And I started losing weight myself. I wasn't looking to lose weight. And we got to the end of the week, and I said, well, let's just keep going. And we both said, let's just keep going, and let's see what happens in a month. Yeah. And about 6 weeks after we started, I was down 22 pounds. I had 60 points off my cholesterol. My exercise ability was beyond where it had ever been. And we just had never looked back. There was just never, all the cravings that we thought we would have, none of that came to fruition. I mean, there's challenges along the way with learning to make food that you never made or learning where to eat and these sorts of things. But we never once wanted to look back. And so at that point I started saying, well, I have now a responsibility to share what I know with my patients. with my friends and with my family, and I didn't really know how to do that. And quite frankly, I had some pretty bad results early on trying to spread that message.
Mm-hmm. Like
Uh,
what?
well, I think, you can be almost overzealous about it, right? And if you don't really know effective
Like this
techniques,
new crusader on this plant-based,
right,
on this vegan
exactly.
diet. Mm-hmm.
And if you don't really know effective techniques to sort of bring things up to people and understand their motivations, then they'll just dismiss you as a, crazy person.
So, what I think is so important to pull out of your story, Ken, is that you have become a true believer that food is medicine from your own experience, not only in the way that it was able to heal or really heal your dad. I mean, did he eventually get off of diabetic or diabetes
Yeah,
meds?
still doing fine, still holding strong.
Yeah, and I mean, the results that you've caused in your family. And so, what kinds of results do you think this lifestyle change could cause in some of your patients?
Well, it's not a matter of thinking. I've gotten a lot of patients to make change, and dropping 35 pounds in 6 weeks is not uncommon. It depends where you start from.
Yeah.
But I have a great many patients who are real believers. And what's interesting about a urologic oncology practice as opposed to, so a lot of people feel like this is the domain of primary care, that is chronic disease. But I believe that all of us in the medical field have a responsibility to take care of, to take advantage of teachable moments when they happen, right? So you come in, you've just heard the C word, and you're scared. You might be listening for the first
Right.
time.
I'm like, what's the C word? Cancer. Oh.
You might be listening for the first time in your life.
Yeah.
And so that's motivation, that's opportunity, and um, you know, I would venture a guess that I've gotten more patients off their diabetic medications or to reduce their diabetic medications than just about anybody around here in the last few years. Same thing goes for blood pressure medications, getting people off their cholesterol medications. People don't want to be over medicated for life. They're just doing what they've been told.
Absolutely. There have been a number of people in the last few weeks that talked about either their parent, their sister, their sibling, their children are suffering with cancer, and it seems to be all around us. And there's no wonder with the foods that we eat as a common practice as our go-to. I'm wondering why more physicians aren't prescribing food as medicine rather than these prescription drugs that seem to have really negative side effects like drowsiness and just fatigue and just breaking down their insides.
I think it's the training, right? So physicians don't get virtually any training in nutrition during medical school.
Mm-hmm.
It's really embarrassingly low. We spend an overabundance of time learning about pharmaceuticals and interventions. Um, I think that probably dates back to like discovery of penicillin and this concept that like there's a pill for every ill.
Mm.
But that's not really the case for chronic disease. I mean, the Western medical system, the one we have around here, is fantastic for acute disease. Right? If you're having a heart attack, if you're having a stroke, if you've been in an accident, this is where you want to be. Mm-hmm. We'll take amazing care of you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't want to have a heart attack, if you don't want to get a stroke, if you don't want to develop cancer, this is a terrible place to live.
Right.
And our system really has failed. We spend more money than anybody else, and our life expectancy isn't any better. But the training hasn't evolved to fix that. And so, despite the fact that people go into medicine with the overwhelmingly absolute right mindset that they want to help people, by the time they're done and they've taken 12 pharmaceutical classes and learned how to prescribe medications, they haven't really learned what it takes to make people the healthiest they can be.
Mm-hmm. Do you think also the lifestyle of the physician has something to do with it? Because my sisters, my stepmom, they're all in the medical field. My one of my sisters is a nurse, and the other is a pharmacist, and my stepmom is a nurse as well. And when you look around, folks who are prescribing health or are supposed to be supporting the health and well-being of others aren't so healthy themselves. I've even seen doctors that are grossly overweight, and it's like, would it be hypocritical to say you should eat more fruits and veggies or you should consider losing weight when you're as big as a house? I mean, when you're just really out of shape yourself.
Well, you lose credibility for sure, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's one is the credibility issue, and then two is we know that people who are providers who are healthy or engaged in healthy activities are far more likely to prescribe them, right? So if I exercise regularly and I know that that does good for me, I'm far more likely to ask my patients to do that as well. So yeah, right. And physicians don't live any longer. In fact, they might live less than a lot of people because they have high stress jobs. They don't take care of themselves very well.
Yeah.
And it's a sad state of affairs, actually.
Well, it seems like we would benefit from some type of medical lifestyle clinic. Would you know something about that?
Well, we would. There are a few around. I'd love to have one here. We're working on such a project. It's complicated though because we know what elements should go into such a clinic, and we know examples where these clinics are tremendously successful. But we've got an upside down sort of medical billing system, right? And so we are still in this fee for service world where basically we incentivize disease, right? It doesn't pay to be healthy or to be dead. It only pays to be sick. But these sorts of clinics have profound power to change lives because, of course, we know that eating healthy food makes for healthy people, for example. But how do we get people to really make that change and be adherent to that change? Because that's really the problem, is adherence. You can get somebody to eat a salad once, but how do we get them to eat a salad every day for a week?
As a true lifestyle change, yeah.
It's lifestyle change. And so there are lots of things that go into that because our world is constructed in a way that it's easy to be unhealthy.
So tell me about, what is this medical lifestyle clinic? What is it, and what could it look like here?
Yeah, so there's a whole field of lifestyle medicine of which there's a board certification. I have gotten that knowledge, and I did that really just for my own education to help my patients. So lifestyle medicine, the 6 sort of pillars of lifestyle medicine are a whole food plant-based diet, exercise, stress reduction, sleep, community, avoiding risky behaviors, all the things that we talked about, all the things that we know make for health, right?
That would be great for everyone.
Right. There's like no one that this doesn't help because almost nobody does all of these things perfectly. And so it's a matter of having providers who can put that first. So instead of coming in and saying, geez, you're diabetic, here's your drug, it's, geez, you're diabetic, let's start with these lifestyle changes and then come back. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to add the medication.
Right.
So you need physicians, APPs, whatever it may be, advanced practice providers who understand how to write that prescription for people, who can meet people where they're at, right? So the person who's drinking the 6 Mountain Dews a day, you're probably not going to get them to immediately go to a whole food plant-based diet. So how do we make that change over time? So these are the things that happen in those sorts of clinic, and people who are comfortable with medication de-escalation. Right? So like the common thing we do in patients is, well, your blood pressure is getting worse, we're going to have to up the medication. We know how to do that. All Western medicine physicians know how to do that. But they're not comfortable going the other way because it happens so infrequently. Well, your blood pressure is better, so we can take you off the medication. Or your diabetes is getting better, so we can wind that down. So we need people who can help with those things. We need people who can, these clinics have exercise physiologists, they have health coaches, they have behavioral psychologists, people that can help you really make those changes in a sustainable fashion, in a way that's enjoyable. Because ultimately, these sorts of changes have to feel good to be sustainable. Because fear is not a good motivator in the long run.
Right. So you can't just tell your patient, if you don't do something, you're going to die. I mean, that's, make you think again. But if,
Well, so
what do you
that
tell your
works,
patients?
that works for some people, right?
Uh-huh.
And surprisingly, it works surprisingly well in some people, but majority it doesn't, right? So like, if I'm about to fall off a bridge, fear is a pretty good motivator.
Right.
If I've been standing on the bridge for an hour, I'm getting comfortable. I'm not going to fall off. So you have to figure out what motivates people. Well, you're 68, you're overweight, you're now on 2 medications for your high blood pressure. Um, you know, what is it you want out of life? Well, you want enough energy to run around and chase your grandkids. You want to be at your granddaughter's wedding, whatever it is, and fit in that tuxedo 3 years from now. Well, we've got to change what you're doing. Are you not happy with the results that you're getting right now? Then what's it going to take? So it's some motivational interviewing that way.
Mm-hmm.
And usually if you can get people to start, I often challenge people. Let's see if you can make these changes for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then we'll follow up with you. Then they'll start to really see change. And even if they don't end up 100% of the way where I want them to, they often don't fall all the way back down.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, when you speak to your patients about making these lifestyle changes, do you also speak to them in the context of kind of enrolling or getting their entire family to be on board with the necessity of this lifestyle change to support that?
Well, you definitely have to. You have to take some assessment. So who do you eat with? How do you prepare your food? Who does the shopping? And a lot of times, the majority of the times, you'll get somebody else in the house to help out, and that's going to lead to a lot more success. When you've got a divided refrigerator, it's a lot harder. Because temptation's really hard. It's easy to walk down the cookie aisle at the grocery store and not buy anything, but when that box of cookies open on your counter, boy, it's hard not to eat one.
So what you're prescribing for your patients who have been diagnosed with some form of cancer is to completely eliminate meat, completely eliminate sugars?
So I hold it up as, here's the best, right? 100% whole food plant-based diet is the best we can do. If it's 95, we probably don't really know the difference between 95% and 100%. The data's not there. So I think that's what we should be shooting for. Personally, I think it's easier to be 100% than 95%.
Right.
In my mind, that works better for me. But it doesn't for everybody. But any move along the continuum is better than nothing. So if all we're doing is going 25% and you were terrible before, there's going to be some benefit to that. I try to tell people, like, I don't want you to view this as an all or none proposition, because when I ask people to do that, they immediately turn off.
Right.
No way I could I've been eating Friday night fish fry every night, every week for the last 72 years. There's no possible way I could give that up. Okay, don't give that up. But understand that it's what you're doing 95% of the time, not the 5% of the time that's going to determine where you're at. And that becomes a lot more palatable for people.
So what is the average age of the patient that you see?
Well, I see more prostate cancer than anything in my practice, and that's a disease of, 50s to 60s. But I see lots of patients in their 70s and 80s.
Do you ever see women?
Yep. So, women represent probably 40% of a general urology practice, but women have kidneys, so we see kidney cancer. Women have bladder cancer.
Women have kidneys too.
Women have kidneys, yes. Sure. So we have just the position I'm currently in. I see more prostate cancer than any other diagnosis, but yeah, lots of women in our practice too.
Okay, and so for women, when we talk about prevention through nutrition, we've talked about completely doing an about face with your diet to be to doing a whole foods plant-based diet. let's talk about the preventative nature, right? Don't wait until you have that big C conversation about, oh, you've got cancer. I mean, just with the stats and the information that you shared earlier on in the show, um, that processed meat is right up there with smoking as a category one. I mean, people should really want to stop, knowing that eating all of that bacon and all the nitrate infused foods could really put a dent in your body.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the problem with lifestyle choices is they take effect over 20 to 30 years for the average person. Right. So if I eat the bacon today, outside of maybe some indigestion, I'm really not going to feel terrible. The effect isn't going to take place for a very long time, even though at a microscopic level inside my body, it's happening all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much, I try to tell people, it's much, much harder to reverse or stop disease once it's happened. It's the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so getting people in earlier to make these changes is better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a challenge, right? Because when you're younger, particularly like when you're reproductive age, evolutionarily, you can kind of do whatever you want to your body.
Mm-hmm.
I used to say I had a cast iron stomach and that lasted probably till I was about 30. And then all of a sudden you start to realize, geez, I can't eat the same junk I used to eat without getting upset. Because once we've reproduced, then like evolutionarily, we probably have less need to be around. And so that's why a lot of these chronic diseases, even though we are starting to see them, and the start of them is clearly present in younger patients.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the worst manifestations don't happen until much, much later. But women aren't any more immune to cardiovascular disease. I mean, men tend to have it a little bit more, but we certainly see it. We certainly see it in women. We certainly see diabetes in women, and we certainly see malignancies in women. The big difference between women and men in terms of the healthcare system is that women tend to appear a little bit more regularly and care for their bodies.
So women actually make their appointments.
They tend to actually show up. They tend to actually make an appointment, and they tend to actually show up.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there should be some type of social responsibility on the side of the food manufacturers and producers to have better labeling or to manage that advertising. And I think with the time that we have left, we may be opening another can of worms. But do you know of anything that's countering the massive advertising that's happening for the foods that aren't too good for us?
Well, not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough, right? Because ultimately, most food companies historically have one thing in mind, and that's their bottom line, right?
Their profits.
The dairy industry is a perfect example of that. And I grew up in Wisconsin. I understand I'm not out to hunt down anybody's job, but there's no truth in advertising there. Mm-hmm. Now, there are organizations, there are food companies that want to do better. Impossible Foods that you mentioned is a good example of that. Their founders basically said, we want to create healthier food and we want to take animals off the plate. I mean, that's clearly a noble goal.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other ones like that. I mean, there are plenty of organizations that have tried to create clarity around these things. American College of Lifestyle Medicine is one. Another great organization is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is based out of DC, and they primarily look after a whole food plant-based diet, and they do a lot of political activism in that space. And there are organizations like PETA or animal welfare organizations as well. But the vegetable lobby isn't real big. There's not a lot of money in broccoli.
Yeah.
So this is a big problem. This is a big problem.
And I guess when we talk about the amount of produce that we have imported rather than growing it here ourselves has increased over time. And that's a whole nother realm of our local farmers being put out of business by it. I would love to see this lifestyle clinic that you speak of. What's been done to try and bring something like that here?
Well, we've got a little bit of a grassroots organization here on campus of interested parties. Overwhelming approval by the provider community. We have patients who want it, but the challenges are largely financial, right? And so again, we've just got a system that a health system overall, and not it's every bit as true here in southeastern Wisconsin, that doesn't incentivize disease prevention. And the real money is there. I mean, like big dollars in prevention, and it comes from savings, which is sort of a backwards model, right? So, like, if I have an insured population, and uh, let's say I'm a large employer and I provide insurance for my employees. Well, the cost of that insurance is based upon the risk profile of these employees, health risk profile, right? So if I shift that to healthier people, it costs me less money. So, like, if everybody's a 25-year-old plant-based marathon runner, it's going to cost me nothing to provide health insurance. If everybody's 65-year-old diabetic, morbidly obese, patient with high blood pressure who smokes, it's going to cost me a lot of money. So the savings comes in terms of reducing risk profile, and it comes in terms of savings down the line. If I get you eating healthy and doing healthy lifestyle things now, maybe you don't need to take days off of work. Maybe you don't have that heart attack at 62 and need to leave the workforce after we trained you for 30 years and moved you up in the system. But if I'm on the other side, I'm worried about what's our balance sheet look like at the end of the year. It's hard to understand what my balance sheet looks like 5 years from now. So there are lots of reasons to go down this road, and places that have done it have had tremendous success. Their employee engagement goes up. Their providers love to practice this way. I mean, these are happy patients who become healthy. But the federal government hasn't designed a system that adequately reimburses for getting people off medication or making people healthier, and so we've got a backwards system.
From the work that I've done in the emergency food space, there are a number of groups leading the charge with these food as medicine coalitions across the country, making healthy and safe food and prescribing it the norm. And so I'd love to see the lifestyle clinic and this whole movement for food as medicine, especially with an emergency food, feeding homebound seniors home-cooked meals prepared by a dietitian or in combination of a chef and a dietitian, and have them delivered, and currently piloting them, doing pilots to see in partnership with insurance companies for reimbursements. I'm very hopeful some of what's happening here locally and what's happening in several locations across the country will really live or breathe some life into this lifestyle center that you've been talking about, Dr. Jacobsohn.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, we owe it to the people who don't know what food they're going to eat to give them healthy food. Otherwise, we are just one meal at a time making life worse for them.
And I would think even with the state of Wisconsin, with this whole campaign of a healthier Wisconsin, and County Executive Crowley stating that he wants Milwaukee County to be the healthiest. Now, the 72 counties, Milwaukee has not been the healthiest for a very long time, if ever. And so I can see a number of our electeds getting behind this and really putting a stake in the ground and backing up what they say with action. And so I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention and really taking a stand not only for your own life, but really for the sake of your patients. And it sounds like you have evidence to back up some of the things that you've shared. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with me or with our audience before we close out here today?
No, I just, look, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate what you're doing. I think that, people should have hope that there are people like you trying to move things in the right direction. And sometimes it feels like progress is slower than we'd like it to be, but there is a big movement. There are younger people who want health. They can look forward and see what's coming if they don't make change, and we just have to keep smiling and moving them in the right direction.
Oh, wonderful. You're absolutely right. Folks, we've been talking to Dr. Ken Jacobsohn, professor, urologist, oncologist with the Medical College of Wisconsin. We thank you for your time. Folks, prevention through nutrition. Eat your fruits and veggies. They can be life-preserving, okay? You're listening to Spilt Milk, the Food Trust Podcast. I'm your host, Raina Andrews. Tune in every Friday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time right here on Spilt Milk, right here on Facebook. We go live. Be sure to ask questions, and we'll try and get them answered by Dr. Jacobsohn a little bit later. So have a great weekend and stay safe.
Oh, I think it went great. What did you think? It'll be interesting. I know that they're out there. They're sort of. I like that they're sort of like doing their own thing without the burden of right. So things here at move slowly. It's like moving an aircraft carrier, which is probably good and bad. But in terms of this, can't happen fast. You should look at the food.